Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're going my final thoughts for week 2 of the NFL season on Draftkings. All I do in this video is I take a handful of players I like the most at each position and put them in a player pool for you guys, and we'll talk our way through it, just looking over the numbers, the statistics, I guess it's the same thing as the numbers, the matchups, talk about ownership a little bit and all that kind of fun stuff. And then on Saturday or Sunday morning, I will post a core plays video that will have my favorite plays on the entire slate and guys that are most likely to make my main lineup. And on Saturday morning, if you guys would like, I could potentially make like a lineup building video, GPPs, cash games, or something like that. Just a thought, not guaranteed, but I could potentially do something like that if I have time on Saturday morning to do so. So just be on the lookout for that as well. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. And we're all season long trying to help you guys become better NFL DFS players, and I cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you don't follow me on social media, my handles are in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. We got over 300 members. You can hop into the Discord chat, ask me all the questions you want, talk strategy, hang out during the games, whatever you prefer, and you get access into my entire NFL DFS datasheet. That's pretty much got all the statistics you need each and every single week. And also my cheat sheet with notes as well. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, that's fine. Let's just dive into this weekend's slate. So we're going to start with the quarterbacks. Not a lot has changed as always because, not too much can change from Tuesday to Friday unless we get really major injury news. But with the quarterbacks, I don't have to worry about that too much. But we'll start up top here with Lamar Jackson. He's at a massive 8,200. But the thing with Lamar is you pretty much get the roster two guys. When you roster Lamar, you're getting an RB1 and an QB1 for the most part. And this game is going to have a lot of points scored according to Vegas, and I can totally agree with them. 52.5 point over under, a 29.5 implied team total for the Baltimore Ravens, which is the highest on the slate, and a 6.5 point spread. The only concern here is if the Ravens get to too big of a lead where they don't have to really start trying at the end of the game, although we saw of them facing the Browns last week, they were killing the Browns and they still kept trying, and Lamar Jackson scored around 30 Draftkings points, so it was kind of just typical Lamar Jackson stuff. I'm not really too worried about the game getting out of hand, and if Deshaun Watson keep this game close at home, Lamar Jackson has around 40 point upside if he's running the ball and gets over 100 yards on the ground, which we know he is certainly capable of. Last season, he was averaging a nearly 10 rushing attempts per game and nearly 80 yards rushing per game and about a half a rushing touchdown per game. If we're looking at what he did in week 1, he pretty much did all of his damage through the air, had 275 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, no interceptions, and 11 yards per attempt with an 80% completion percentage. Now, albeit the Browns secondary is pretty horrendous. We saw that last night with Joe Burrow where he threw the ball 61 times and had nearly 400 passing yards. But it's Lamar Jackson. He can beat you on the ground. He can beat you through the air. He's going to be totally fine. He only had 45 rushing yards in the first game versus the Browns, but he really didn't need to have to do too much, and he was just fine through the air. So definitely like Lamar Jackson, but he is not a must-play in this slate. I'm a big fan of using Kyler Murray in cash this weekend. He is over $2,000 cheaper, and he ran the ball 13 times earlier in the season in week 1. So I see no reason to have to pay up for Lamar Jackson in cash games. I don't mind him in tournaments. Yeah, you can play him in cash games, but it's going to cost you someone like Devonte Adams or Derrick Henry, which I'm not really a big fan of losing out those guys in cash games. But the matchup's pristine here. The Texans were 26 DVA versus the pass last season, over 23 DK points per game, 280 passing yards, and over 2 passing touchdowns. And they're also terrible on the ground as well. So Lamar Jackson, he checks pretty much every single box. But I do not think he's a necessity, but he is a smash play. And if he scores 40 points, I would not be surprised in the slightest. But going down to Dak Prescott, 6,800, I would rather play Dak over Lamar Jackson. You get over $1,000 discount, and this game's just going to be equally as good, might even be better. I mean, there's a lot of good options in this game. You got Matt Ryan, Dak Prescott, you got Zeke, you got Julio, you got Calvin Ridley, you got CeeDee Lamb, you got Michael Gallup, you got Hayden Hurst. This game is absolutely loaded. And it should be. There's a 52 point over-under. The Cowboys have a 28.5 implied team total, and they're also 5-point favorites at home. I think the Falcons should be able to keep this game close, and if they do, we have a potential huge shootout on our hands, and Vegas would agree. But definitely Dak Prescott here. Both teams play very fast as well. I believe the Cowboys were first in pace of play in week 1, and the Falcons were third in pace of play as well. And if you're looking at their numbers last season, both teams played fast as well. Dak wasn't overly impressive in the first start. He only had 266 passing yards with 1 passing touchdown. Just threw the ball 39 times, but only had a yards per attempt of 6.8, which is pretty low. But look, Dak Prescott, this is a very beatable pass defense, and Dak Prescott's obviously talented. He's got a ton of weapons. And we saw Russell Wilson absolutely shred this defense last week. And if you're looking at their numbers last year, they led over 21 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, 25th DVA versus the pass, 250 passing yards, and nearly 2 passing touchdowns per game. This is an excellent matchup for Dak Prescott, and he's very easy to stack with guys like CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, and Amari Cooper. So love Dak Prescott. Arguably the QB1 on the slate, but anytime Lamar Jackson on the slate, he's got to be the QB1. But point per dollar wise, I would say Dak Prescott. It really makes a run for Lamar's money as being the top quarterback option on this slate, and they're also very close in my projections as well. But on the flip side of this game, I do like Matt Ryan quite a bit. He came in at 6,600, and again, this is a huge total game, and they're 5-point dogs on the road, and I assume they're going to have to pass the ball quite a bit. And what they did last season, they threw the ball a ton. I believe he was averaging around 44 pass attempts per game last season. And then week 1 for Matt Ryan, he had 450 passing yards, 54 pass attempts, yards per attempt of 8.3, 2 passing touchdowns, and a 68% completion percentage. And like Dak Prescott, he's got a boatload of weapons to throw the ball to. Elite receiver, Julio Jones, one of the best receivers in all the NFL. You have a really, really good secondary option in Calvin Ridley. Then you have a capable tight end of Hayden Hurst as well. So most of the people are on Dak Prescott. Matt Ryan is a pretty strong tournament option because they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. Dallas's pass defense, if you're looking at their numbers last season, they were 23rd DVA versus the pass last year. Now, they were pretty stingy versus quarterbacks, only 17 points per game, 240 passing yards, and only 1.25 touchdowns per game. But the volume's going to be there. There's a ton of talent here. Matt Ryan's obviously a good NFL quarterback, and we're in a dome. I think he's an excellent tournament pivot off of Dak Prescott. If you're playing cash games and you don't want to go Kyler Murray, I prefer going with Dak Prescott, but I really like Matt Ryan in tournaments. And then the cash quarterback this week, I'm going to assume everyone's going to play him in cash for the most part, expecting to be the highest owned quarterback. But it's Kyler Murray, 6,100. He's kind of like Lamar Jackson light, and he did a lot of damage on the ground last week, and it was a tough matchup versus the 49ers. But he looked very good, and especially very good for fantasy purposes, because the big thing here was the 91 rushing yards and the 13 rushing attempts and the 1 rushing touchdown. That was kind of like Lamar Jackson numbers last year. This is a team that also tends to play pretty fast. And if you're looking at the matchup, I know the Washington football team, they were an awful defense last year. Now, they're going to be improved this season, but I still think Kyler Murray at 6,100 is fine. He's got one of the best receivers in football in DeAndre Hopkins. He's got a good run game in Kenyan Drake. And obviously the guy's a dual threat quarterback, which is perfect for DFS purposes. And I'm just loving the price tag here at 6,100. He's pretty much the guy you're going to be plugging in for cash games. And he's going to allow you to spend up at other positions this week. So I think he's very underpriced. He could honestly be around that Matt Ryan and Dak Prescott range. So I am all about Kyler Murray in cash games. And I would say he's a core play for me this week. I don't typically make quarterbacks core plays because they're kind of interchangeable for the most part. But that price tag really, really sticks out for me on Kyler Murray. Now, Phillip Rivers, 5,900. So everyone likes his weapons this week, but I'm not seeing a lot of love for Phillip Rivers, and that doesn't make sense because if we like all their weapons, we got to like the quarterback. That's like saying you love Amari Cooper, you like Michael Gallup, you like CeeDee Lamb, but no one would have interest in Dak Prescott, which isn't the case. So I don't really get that with Phillip Rivers. So if he's going to come in lower owned, I'm a big fan of that in tournaments because it's easy to stack with. You got Phillip Rivers, you got Paris Campbell, and you got T.Y. Hilton. And heck, even Jonathan Taylor catches balls from Phillip Rivers, so even then that's not the worst correlation in the world either. And you could even potentially run that back with someone like DJ Chark, or I'm sorry, not DJ Chark, I'm thinking of last week. Run that back with someone like Adam Thielen. So this is a pretty easy game to stack up. And look, I like Phillip Rivers a lot. The Vikings got absolutely shredded by Aaron Rodgers last week, and he's got some good weapons here. Phillip Rivers is not afraid to throw the ball. He had 46 pass attempts last week, a completion percentage of 78%, and 363 passing yards. And he's got some pretty good weapons. So I like the price point. And like I said, the Vikings defense versus the pass last week was horrendous. He's got an awesome offensive line here, so he should have time to throw the ball. So 5,900, I don't mind Rivers in tournaments, but for $200 more, just give me Kyler Murray in cash games. And we'll move on to the running back position here, and we'll start up top with Zeke Elliott at 8,200. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get up there in cash games. I would like to, but I'm absolutely in love with Devonte Adams in cash games this week, and I'm really planning on playing Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor, so I'm not sure if I'm going to spend up for Zeke, because I also really like Amari Cooper. So, I mean, I would love to play Zeke Elliott, Henry, Devonte Adams, and Cooper in cash games, but you run out of salary very, very quick. So I might have to make a tough decision there, but I feel like Zeke might be the guy I have to cut out of the cash lineup just because it's a tough fit, but I do love him here. It's an excellent spot. He's a 5-point favorite at home with a 52-point over-under with a 28.5 implied team total. I see no reason why Zeke can't have a monster game here. Both teams play at a fast pace. He's involved in the passing game as well. Actually had a receiving touchdown last week. Nearly had 100 yards rushing, had 22 rushing attempts, a rushing touchdown, 4.4 yards per carry, 4 targets, which isn't great, but 10% target share, 18% weighted opportunity share, not too bad. It's a great matchup versus Atlanta. I love the Dallas Cowboys on this slate. He is an excellent option, but I do like a couple of running backs, a little bit better point per dollar wise than Zeke Elliott, but he's still top 3 for me. My top 3 running backs on the week are going to be Zeke, Derrick Henry, and Jonathan Taylor. Love absolutely all 3 of those guys. But pretty much my RB1 on the slate is going to be Derrick Henry here at 7,900. This just sets up really well for a huge Derrick Henry game, and he tends to play pretty well versus Jacksonville. But, Jacksonville's defense versus the run last season was just absolutely atrocious, and their defense is probably getting a little bit even, or not even probably, it's going to get a lot worse this season. They let go quite a few people. And Derrick Henry should be able to absolutely smash here. Last season versus the run, they were 31st DVA versus the run, led over 30 Draftkings points per game, over a rushing touchdown per game, and nearly 120 rushing yards per game. And Derrick Henry, the guy's a good bet for around 30 touches, if not more. Last week, we saw him get 31 rushing attempts versus Denver, over 100 rushing yards. Did not get a rushing touchdown, but he had 3 targets, which isn't too bad. Now, Derrick Henry's not someone I can expect to be too involved in the passing game, but I'll take a couple of catches from him. But even if he doesn't, he should be able to get all the damage done on the ground. It would not surprise me if he had 30-plus carries, 200 rushing yards, and 2 to 3 rushing touchdowns. This is just a great matchup for him. And the Titans are 9-point favorites at home. And anytime the Titans are a huge favorite, Derrick Henry, he should be able to just ground and pound the ball the entire game. So absolutely love him. He is my favorite running back on the slate. Probably going to be the highest or the second highest owned running back on the slate, either him or Jonathan Taylor. Then I think Zeke comes in third in ownership as well. But love Derrick Henry. 9-point favorites at home. It just screams Henry's going to have a huge game. More of a GPP option here in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but 7,400 to beat the Chargers last season. You wanted to run the ball against them. Now, I don't think the Chiefs are going to have trouble throwing the ball because they have the best quarterback and Patrick Mahomes. You got Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson. They should have no issues throwing the ball. I'm just saying they were a little bit weaker versus the ground last season, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire looked awesome week 1. And volume was no issue at all. He didn't do anything in the passing game. He only had 1 target with 0 catches, but I would expect that to ramp up. But just on the ground alone, he was excellent. Had 138 rushing yards on 25 rushing attempts. So if you're going to give me 20 to 30 touches from Clyde Edwards-Helaire and the best offense in football, yeah, I will take that in tournaments. Now, I think you just play Henry, Taylor in cash games, then you figure out your third running back. But I don't mind him in tournaments because the upside's there. They are 8.5-point favorites here. 27.75 applied team total, and like I said, the Chargers are a little susceptible to the ground last season, or to running backs, I should say. 19th DVA versus the run, led over 26 DK points per game to running backs, and nearly 100 rushing yards per game, and nearly a rushing touchdown per game. And look, if you're the RB1 in Andy Reid offense and Patrick Mahomes your quarterback, you're probably going to have good fantasy games pretty much every single week, so definitely have interest in him in tournaments. Also, another guy I like in tournaments is Kenyan Drake at 5,900. Now, I actually think he's going to gain quite a bit of ownership. I just don't feel like he's a cash play. But I do think he's interesting at this price tag, and that's really kind of the only reason I'm in. Now, this Washington defensive line looks like it's going to be pretty good this season. Last year, it was versus the run and versus the pass, they sucked. Should be improved this season, but he still had 16 rushing attempts last week and 2 targets. If he's going to get me around 20 touches at 5,900, he's a very talented running back. We saw how good he was last season at the back half when he was on the Cardinals. So I think at that price tag, he's totally fine. 6.5-point favorite here at home. Kenyan Drake should be a pretty solid option. This is also a team that plays pretty fast as well. Then getting to the chalk of all chalk play of the entire week, we have Jonathan Taylor at 5,700, the rookie. Marlon Mack is out for the season, so Jonathan Taylor should eat here. And don't even think about it in cash games. You are plugging him in. There's just no way around it. If he sucks, he sucks, but I don't see a scenario where he's going to suck. But if he does, he's going to be super high owned. It's not going to matter. Anyway, if you want to get different in tournaments and go with Nyheim Hines to get leverage, I don't mind that at all. But if we're playing cash games, you just plug in Taylor. He should get around 20 touches in this offense. It's an amazing run blocking offensive line here. They have a huge advantage according to PFF this week. Looking at their numbers, a 75% run blocking advantage according to PFF. Now, the Vikings were a little bit stingy versus the run last year, but Jonathan Taylor should be fine here. He's going to get the Phillip Rivers dump-offs. We saw last week he had 6 targets for 67 receiving yards. We saw Nyheim Hines got the targets as well. So Phillip Rivers is going to keep throwing to running backs, and if Jonathan Taylor can get me 15 to 20 rushing attempts with around 5 targets, at 5,700, that is a very easy plug-in for me going up against the Vikings, and also 3-point favorites at home as well. So absolutely love Jonathan Taylor, and so does everyone else playing DraftKings this week. So just plug him in. Now, moving on to wide receivers, I have a laundry list of receivers I like. It's a pretty deep position. There's a lot of good spend-ups, a lot of good mid-range options, and a lot of good cheap options as well. But the obvious wide receiver one on this slate is Devonte Adams at 8,100. I don't see a scenario where you can get really away from him in cash games. I feel like he's pretty much just a lock, even though he is pretty expensive. That's why I'm kind of thinking I'm not going to be able to fit in Zeke, because if I play Zeke, I'm probably not going to be able to fit Adams in, which I feel like I'm going to need him. Maybe he doesn't get 20 targets again nearly and gets 2 touchdowns, but he's a very safe bet here, and this is a good matchup versus Detroit. But let's talk about Adams. The volume was there last weekend. He had 17 targets, 156 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, a 41% target share, 50% market share of the team's air yards, and a 97% share, or a weighted opportunity share. And this is a pretty good matchup here versus Detroit. They were one of the worst pass defenses in the league last season. They also lost Darius Slay. But last year, they were 29th DVA versus the pass, allowed over 42 Draftkings points per game to wide receivers, over a receiving touchdown per game, and nearly 200 receiving yards. Devonte Adams, he's the wide receiver one for Aaron Rodgers. He's pretty much the only talented wide receiver on the team. Lazard's fine, but Devonte Adams is obviously the guy here. He's going to get a ton of targets, should get around 15, 20 targets, for being honest. 20 might be pushing it, but we saw 17 last weekend, and it worked. They knew where the ball was going. They just couldn't stop it. I don't see how Detroit's going to stop it. We saw Mitch Trubisky have some success late in the game versus Detroit, so Adams should be totally fine here. As a pivot in tournaments, I don't mind DeAndre Hopkins pairing him up with Kyler Murray, but you can certainly play Kyler Murray naked. I know usually you want to pair up a wide receiver with your quarterback, but with Kyler Murray's rushing upside, he's a guy that you can play naked, kind of like with Lamar Jackson. But Hopkins was kind of like Devonte Adams last week, where he was just getting all the targets. He had 16 targets, 151 receiving yards, and didn't get into the end zone, but 43% target share, 102% weighted opportunity share, 53% market share of the team's air yards, had a low 8 out of 6.4, but he's going to get all the targets here for the most part. And even though the Washington football team's defense is going to be improved, DeAndre Hopkins, he's pretty much unguardable, so he's pretty much matchup proof for the most part. They have a team total of 26.25, which is pretty darn good, so I have a lot of interest here in DeAndre Hopkins. Julio Jones is another guy that's kind of just for tournaments if you're using Matt Ryan or just stacking up that game. Say you want to go Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, you could run it back with Julio Jones, or if you go Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, you could stack it or run it back with Amari Cooper. But he's pretty much just there for tournaments, not going to go there in cash games. So we've got a 52-point over-under. They're going to be 5-point road dogs here, and he had 157 receiving yards last week, which is actually more than Devonte Adams and DeAndre Hopkins. Had a pretty healthy 12 targets. It's nowhere near 17 or 16, but still, he's going to be heavily targeted. 50% share of the team's air yards, 188 air yards, and an ADOT of 15.7. And I think it's fine here. The matchup versus Dallas, if you're looking at how they did versus wide receivers last season, they were 23rd DVA versus the pass. Only allowed 30 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers and 134 receiving yards, which is pretty tough. But Julio Jones is unguardable. He can win pretty much every single matchup. So I think he's fine in tournaments, but I'm not going to go there in cash games. Although this is someone I'm going to go with in cash games. Amari Cooper at 6,300. He is just simply underpriced. And I'm really not sure why he's this low, but he's one of my favorite options on the entire slate. Him and Devonte Adams are clearly the 2 best wide receivers on this slate, just point per dollar wise, and then you factor in matchups. And you're probably going to want to plug both of them in for cash games. That's what my recommendation would do. Just find a way to get both in. But he had 13 targets last week, a 37% target share, 80% weighted opportunity share, 44% market share of the team's air yards. And if you're looking at the Falcons versus the pass last season, 25th DVA versus the pass, allowed over 35 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, nearly 170 receiving yards. Now, Amari Cooper is obviously a very talented wide receiver, and he's very easy to pair with Dak Prescott. They're both in the 6K range, which is really not breaking the bank. They have a 28.5 applied team total, 52-point over-under. And also, if you're looking at Amari Cooper's career splits, he's much better at home here, and he's going to be at home, and he's a favorite, which also works in his favor as well. So, love Amari Cooper, 6,300, probably one of the highest owned players on the entire slate. Then going on to T.Y. Hilton, I just like him as a pairing with Phillip Rivers, but you could also play him as a one-up as well. Also, like Amari Cooper, he does have much better splits at home as well, at home in the Dome in Indy. And there's a pretty healthy 47.5 applied team total in this game and a 3-point spread, so it should be pretty back and forth, and I think there's shootout potential here. Now, he had 9 targets last week and only 53 receiving yards, but he had an 8 out of 12.1, over 100 air yards, and look, this is a pretty beatable matchup here versus Minnesota. They got absolutely eaten alive by Devonte Adams last week, and T.Y. Hilton is a talented receiver. He's got Phillip Rivers throwing the ball, so I think he's a fine option as a one-off in cash games or just in tournaments as well to pair up with Phillip Rivers. Marvin Jones, 5,700. It looks like Kenny Golladay is going to end up missing this game again. And if that's the case, Marvin Jones definitely enters consideration for me. Now, he didn't really knock your socks off last week. He did have 8 targets, which was fine, but he wasn't really getting the ball down the field too much. He only had 55 receiving yards and 8 out of 8.8, 70 air yards, and only 18% market share of the team's air yards. But he'll be fine here. Green Bay's secondary kind of got torched by Adam Thielen last week. So I think Marvin Jones is an okay play. I'd rather play T.Y. Hilton, to be honest. But Marvin Jones should be safe here as long as Kenny Galladay's out. If Kenny Galladay's in, I'll pass on Marvin Jones. But they are 6-point dogs here on the road in Green Bay. So I think Marvin Jones is fine. And he has a knack for playing good against Green Bay as well. So I don't mind Marvin Jones, but just monitor Kenny Galladay's status. C.D. Lamb, 4,700. Look, he had 7 targets last week, and he's also pretty cheap, and he looked pretty good as well. And I just have a ton of interest in this game with the 52-point over-under. And like I said, this game is very easy to stack up. And you got some pretty affordable guys. Gallup's only 5,600. Dak Prescott's not too expensive. So I definitely love the Cowboys here, the second highest implied team total on the slate. So I think C.D. Lamb is fine at the price point, especially if he can get me around 5 to 8 targets weekly. So I definitely like C.D. Lamb in a pretty beatable matchup here versus the Falcons. Paris Campbell, 4,500. He played 95% of his snaps last week from the slot. And he was heavily involved as well. He had 9 targets last week, an ADOT of 11.9, over 100 air yards, 700 receiving yards. And like I said multiple times with T.Y. Hilton, this is a beatable matchup. And he's easily paired with Phillip Rivers, and he's only $4,500. So the Indianapolis Colts are a pretty cheap stack on this slate. I mean, Jonathan Taylor's not expensive, Campbell and T.Y. Hilton are affordable, and Phillip Rivers is dirt cheap. So you can easily stack up the Colts on this slate and have room to spend up for other studs in your lineup as well as one-offs. And then Deontay Johnson at 4,500. So he got 10 targets, which it feels like a quiet 10 targets because it feels like people weren't too excited about what Deontay Johnson did. But he was heavily involved. He had a 32% target share, a 70% weighted opportunity share. That wasn't really targeted too deep down the field with an ADOT of 6.3 and only 63 air yards. But if you're going to give me 10 targets from Big Ben, I'll take it, especially at that price tag of 4,500. And he looked good too. I know he muffed the punt early on in the game, but he should be a fine option here. Denver secondary is really not going to scare me too much. Corey Davis had over 100 receiving yards. A.J. Brown didn't really do anything until late in the game, but I'm not too scared of Denver here, and I like that price point at 4,500 too. And Deontay Johnson, he looked good, so definitely have some interest in him. Corey Davis, he's a little bit banged up, but I'm assuming he's going to play. But the reason I have him on here is because A.J. Brown's looking like he's going to miss this game with a bone bruise, and if that's the case, I like Corey Davis quite a bit. I actually thought he was a decent value option even if A.J. Brown was going to play. But if he's out, I mean, Corey Davis is the wide receiver 1 here easily. And last week he had 8 targets for over 100 receiving yards, and he looked fantastic. Had an 8 out of 11.9. He's getting the ball down the field a little bit. 20% target share, 40% market share of the team's air yards. Now, they threw the ball 43 times last week, and I can't expect that to happen again, especially as 9-point favorites at home here. But if you're going to get me like 6 to 10 targets from Corey Davis against a Jacksonville secondary that's just not very good, I'll take that at 4,000 because he looked very impressive. We know the guy's got talent. He was a former first-round pick. So I definitely like the spot for Corey Davis. Like that price point. If you need a cheap wide receiver, he feels pretty good. Especially if A.J. Brown misses. I think he's viable even if A.J. Brown plays. But if he's out, I mean, he's the guy. And then Brashad Perriman at 3,800. This is an interesting play. So, not Jay Crowder. I'm thinking of the NBA. Jamison Crowder is going to be out in this one. So Brashad Perriman, he actually played every single offensive snap for the Jets last week. And now the matchup versus the 49ers looks pretty scary, but Richard Sherman's on the IR, so he doesn't have to face him either. So at 3,800, he should get a handful of targets here. Last week he saw 5 targets, only had 17 receiving yards, but I think we can probably pencil him in for around 5, 8, maybe 10 pushing it, but I'd say anywhere from that 5 to 10 range in the targets is certainly viable, and only 3,800 is a 7-point dog. I don't think it's the worst play in the world. Now, the matchup versus 49ers, again, it's not great, but with no Richard Sherman, that certainly softens up the defense a little bit, especially in the secondary. So, at 3,800, I think that's fine. I do. All right, now we'll move on to the tight ends. Nothing too exciting this week. I'm probably going to end up spending down here so I can spend up at wide receiver and running back. But if you are spending up or if you want to stack with Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, 6,300. He's coming off a 2-touchdown performance with 6 targets. And he had, 58 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, 24% target share, and an ADOT of 10.5. So he's getting the ball down the field as well. But, I mean, the matchup versus the Texans is pretty good. They were 26 DVA versus the pass last season. They did struggle versus tight ends. He's got a huge tight end versus safety matchup here versus Eric Murray. And look, I mean, obviously he's one of the better tight ends in the entire NFL. He's got one of the best quarterbacks throwing the ball. And the Ravens have the highest team total in these slates. So if you got the money for him, go for it. But personally, if I'm playing cash games or just single, I'm probably going to have to end up spending down for tight end. Hayden Hurst, 4,600, kind of disappointing in the first game, but I'm in love with this game. And the Cowboys did struggle with tight ends a bit last season, but yeah, 52-point over-under here. They should be throwing the ball quite a bit. Had 5 targets, 38 receiving yards, only 9% target share. Pretty gross, but again, the matchup's fine here versus the Cowboys. The 23rd DVA versus the pass allowed over 15 DraftKings points per game to tight ends. And Matt Ryan's obviously a very good quarterback. There should be a lot of points scored in this game. Hayden Hurst is fine. He's a former first-round pick, so the guy's obviously talented. And it wouldn't surprise me if he found himself into the end zone this week. And Logan Thomas, 3,600, probably going to end up being the chalk tight end. I mean, the Cardinals were just so bad versus tight ends last season. I assume they're going to be better, and they kind of stopped George Kittle, even though he did get banged up a little bit. But Logan Thomas, he had a surprising 8 targets last week. Didn't do a whole lot with it with 37 receiving yards, but he did find the end zone, had a 26% target share, a 60% weighted opportunity share, 30% market share of the team's air yards, 8 out of 9, 72 air yards. You can sign me up. And again, the Cardinals, they sucked versus tight ends last season. Allowed nearly 20 DraftKings points per game to tight ends, over 70 receiving yards, and a touchdown per game. Again, I expect them to improve upon that, and they did week 1. I mean, it's only a 1-game sample size, but 3,600 is not too bad, especially as a 6.5-point dog. They should be throwing the ball quite a bit. Then Chris Herndon, 3,400 with Jamison Crowder out. That's just going to be more targets for guys like Rashad Perriman, Chris Herndon, and he's only 3,400. Now, Herndon, if you played him last week, he sucked the entire game. I think he had 1 catch for 9 yards until like the last drive of the game for the Jets, and then he just kept getting the ball. He was like the garbage man. But yeah, at the very end of the game, he had 7 targets, 37 receiving yards, which kind of saved his day because he got quite a few catches. Wasn't really targeted down the field, but as 7-point dogs here, I mean, they're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. Implied team total of 17 is horrendous, but I think he's fine for the price point. And as for defenses, I don't know. You can't really project defenses, really. All that is pretty much just list the defenses that have one of the lowest implied team totals against them. The 49ers going up against the Jets. I know I had a couple of interest in some of those cheap Jets players, but I'll side with the 49ers defense. They have a team total of 17. The Bills going up against Miami, team total of 17. Ryan Fitzpatrick is not afraid to make stupid mistakes, that's for sure. The Steelers, I mean, they're 7-point favorites on home versus Denver, and only implied team total of 17 against them. And the Buccaneers, I think they're going to be the chalk defense on the slate. I like that price point at 2,900. They got a good rush defense. Pass defense can be a little bit iffy, but they were really improved in the back half of last season. They ended up being 12th DVA versus the pass. They struggle versus wide receivers, but overall, this is a pretty strong defense. They should be able to get pressure on Teddy Bridgewater, and they are 9-point favorites at home here. So that's pretty much it for the defenses. I mean, just plug in whoever fits, to be honest, but these are some of my favorite defenses. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. If you want to check out my NASCAR DFS content, you can check that out. I posted my preview video for Bristol. I absolutely love NASCAR DFS, my favorite DFS sport. And it's on Saturday night, too, so it's not going to interfere with football Sunday, which I love. And I'm going to be going live on Saturday around 5 or 6 p.m. if you want to hop in and ask me some questions. But it's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoy your weekend, and I will leave you out here, and I'll see you in the next video in either the lineup building video or the core plays video.